Jung's work explored a rare phenomenon: people who seemed incapable of anger, entirely unaffected by provocation, criticism, or insult. In his clinical practice, he documented cases of what he called emotional impermeability, a state in which individuals remained calm under circumstances that would normally trigger strong reactions. These people never took things personally, never grew defensive, and seemed immune to the emotional patterns that governed others. Jung considered this discovery unsettling because it wasn't about suppression or practiced detachment. Instead, it reflected a profound psychological transformation that rendered other people's behavior irrelevant to their inner state. The result was a level of emotional freedom that appeared almost supernatural. One of Jung's most revealing cases came in 1919. A wealthy businessman, whom we will call Heinrich, sought him out not because he was suffering, but because others were disturbed by his lack of emotional reactivity. Heinrich had built a steel empire in post-war Germany, and his employees feared him, not for cruelty or violence, but because nothing seemed to rattle him. Insults rolled off him, criticism sparked curiosity instead of defensiveness, and even betrayal failed to upset him. His wife insisted on the consultation after confessing an affair that had lasted 6 months. Heinrich's reaction was astonishingly calm. He simply asked her whether she was happy, whether she needed anything from him, and whether she wished to continue or end their marriage. What Jung discovered was that Heinrich was not emotionally numb. He wasn't repressing anger or sadness. Instead, he had developed a way of interpreting emotional triggers as reflections of his own unconscious, what Jung termed the shadow mirror effect. According to this idea, every person who provokes us is showing us something unresolved within ourselves. A dismissive coworker reflects our own fear of inadequacy. A friend's constant lateness mirrors our craving for control. A critical relative exposes our hidden self-doubt. Heinrich had mastered this principle after a devastating betrayal years earlier, when his business partner stole a client and nearly ruined him. Instead of seeking revenge, Heinrich asked, "What part of me is this betrayal reflecting?" His partner's greed mirrored Heinrich's own suppressed fear of poverty. His dishonesty reflected Heinrich's tendency to hide his emotions. His betrayal revealed Heinrich's own capacity for selfishness. By facing these shadow elements instead of projecting them outward, Heinrich achieved what Jung described as psychological immunity. He no longer interpreted others' behavior as personal attacks, but as insights into their character and into his own unconscious. From this, Jung formulated what he called the shadow integration protocol. When triggered by someone, he suggested asking 3 questions. What trait in this person am I judging most harshly? Where do I exhibit this trait, even in subtle ways? What is this experience trying to teach me about myself? The answers often dissolve the trigger. For example, Sarah, a marketing manager, was constantly frustrated by her colleague Tom's interruptions in meetings. Using Jung's method, she asked herself what she judged in Tom, his need for attention. She then realized she too dominated conversations when she felt insecure. The lesson was clear. Her anger at Tom reflected her own discomfort with attention-seeking behavior. Once she acknowledged this shadow aspect, Tom's interruptions ceased to bother her. She could see them as his insecurity, not an assault on her worth. This is the transformative power of the shadow mirror. It turns emotional triggers into teachers. But Jung's research suggested something even deeper. Those who achieved emotional impermeability had tapped into a rare psychological state, the gap between stimulus and response. Heinrich himself described it to Jung. When someone insults me, I experience something strange. There's a moment of space before I feel anything, and in that space, I am free to choose my response. Heinrich once described his experience of being insulted in a way that fascinated Jung. Time seems to slow down, he said. I can see their words coming toward me. But instead of hitting me, they hover in the air. In that moment, I have a choice. Do I catch these words and make them mine, or do I let them pass through me? This unusual description led Jung to identify what he called the reaction gap, a psychological space where conscious choice replaces unconscious reaction. For most people, a trigger and a reaction feel like a single event. Someone insults us, and almost instantly we feel anger rise and spill over. But those with emotional impermeability had discovered a way to insert awareness into that split second, turning an automatic impulse into a deliberate choice. This challenged psychology's basic assumption that anger is inevitable, that triggers must lead to reactions. Jung's research suggested otherwise. With the right practice, anyone could access this gap and change how they responded. He developed a deceptively simple but profound technique called the observer protocol. When triggered, instead of reacting immediately, you step back and watch the moment as if you were viewing a film. You notice the other person's words, tone, and body language. You also notice your own rising emotions, but without identifying with them. Case after case showed how effective this was. Maria, a teacher, learned to apply the method when her principal criticized her. Instead of becoming defensive, she could see the stress and insecurity driving his words. From this observer state, she responded with empathy rather than anger. The insight Jung found most transformative was this: you are not your emotions. You are the awareness that observes them. Anger, sadness, fear, these are signals, not your identity. You can act on them, question them, or let them pass. Heinrich had mastered this truth so deeply that he described himself as psychologically transparent. Other people's negativity passed through him like light through glass. He wasn't suppressing feelings. He simply chose not to identify with every emotional impulse. Yet Jung also found something unsettling. Those who mastered this ability often became detached from the dramas that consumed others. They no longer cared about winning arguments, proving themselves, or being right. This made them extraordinarily powerful in terms of emotional freedom, but it also isolated them from people still caught in reactive cycles. The observer protocol itself required practice, but Jung found that many patients could access the reaction gap within weeks. The method unfolded in 3 steps. First, pause when triggered and take a conscious breath. Second, observe both the external trigger and your internal response without judgment. Finally, choose your action deliberately, guided by values instead of impulses. This was not about becoming numb or detached, but about reclaiming authorship of one's responses. Jung's research revealed another striking pattern. People with emotional impermeability had built what he called boundary fortresses. Unlike physical walls, these were invisible psychological barriers that determined what entered and influenced their inner state. Heinrich explained it this way: "Doctor, I learned that people can only disturb my peace if I give them permission. Their words, their actions, their emotions, these are external events. They only become my internal experience if I choose to accept them." Most people, Jung realized, had porous psychological boundaries. They absorbed other people's stress, anger, and negativity as if it were their own. But those with emotional immunity had developed selective filters. Jung identified 3 main types. The first was the relevance filter. They only internalized information that served their growth or goals, letting the rest pass by. The second was the ownership boundary. They clearly separated their own emotions from those of others, recognizing, for example, that another person's anger belonged to that person, not to them. The third was the identity fortress. They had such a strong sense of self that no external criticism could shake their core being. People with strong psychological boundaries could hear feedback without mistaking it for judgment of their worth. Yet Jung discovered something unsettling about this strength. Those who developed such boundaries often became magnets for people who lacked them. Toxic personalities, emotional energy vampires, and unstable individuals gravitated toward them, drawn to the stability they radiated. Heinrich experienced this constantly. "Doctor," he told Jung, "ever since I stopped reacting to provocation, people try harder to provoke me. It's as if my calm unsettles them more than anger ever could." Jung realized the reason. Emotionally reactive people rely on others' responses to regulate their own unstable emotions. When Heinrich refused to provide that regulation, it forced others to face their inner chaos. To address this, Jung developed what he called the boundary fortress technique, built on 3 key strategies. The first was the emotional firewall. Before entering a social situation, you consciously decide which emotions you will allow yourself to absorb and which you will observe without internalizing. The second was response selection. Instead of reacting impulsively, you prepare in advance how you will handle common triggers, ensuring your actions reflect your values rather than your impulses. The third was the identity anchor, a clear, unshakable sense of self that turns external opinions into data points rather than threats. One of Jung's patients, David, a software engineer, demonstrated the power of this method. Overwhelmed by a demanding boss, David began using the boundary fortress approach. Each morning, he set an emotional firewall, deciding he would notice his boss's stress but not absorb it. He pre-selected calm, professional responses to criticism, and he anchored his identity in his own competence and growth rather than in his boss's approval. Within weeks, David reported feeling untouchable at work. His boss's moods no longer dictated his peace of mind, and, ironically, his boss began treating him with greater respect. Jung noted this paradox. The stronger your boundaries, the more others sense and honor them. But Jung's most disturbing discovery went even deeper. He called it projection reversal. His emotionally immune patients had learned to see through the attacks of others, perceiving not insults but the wounds that generated them. Heinrich demonstrated this during a session after a rival publicly accused him of being a heartless profiteer who cared nothing for his workers. Rather than respond with anger or defense, Heinrich felt curiosity. "Doctor," he said, "this man's words told me everything about his psychology and nothing about mine." He explained, the rival's accusation of heartlessness revealed his own fear of being seen as unfeeling. His obsession with profit exposed financial insecurity. His sudden concern for workers hinted at guilt about how he treated his own employees. Jung realized Heinrich had developed what he called psychological X-ray vision, the ability to see through surface-level attacks to the deeper psychological wounds behind them. This discovery was unsettling because it revealed the true nature of most human conflict. People were rarely fighting one another directly. They were battling projections of their own unresolved issues cast onto others. Jung documented the pattern repeatedly. Criticism of your appearance often comes from someone insecure about their own. Attacks on your success usually stem from another's frustration with their lack of achievement. Harsh judgments about your choices reflect the critic's own doubts about decisions they regret. The most troubling part, Jung found, was what happened once you could clearly see these projections. It became nearly impossible to take personal attacks personally. Instead of anger, people began to feel compassion for the pain driving others' aggression. Heinrich described this shift vividly. "Doctor, when someone attacks me now, I see a wounded child lashing out in pain. How can I be angry at a child for crying? Instead, I feel curious about what hurt them and whether I can help." This, Jung concluded, was the essence of ultimate psychological immunity. The ability to see others' attacks not as reflections of your worth, but as expressions of their wounds. Once achieved, no insult or provocation could truly disturb you. The projection reversal technique rested on 3 diagnostic questions. When someone attacks me, what quality are they targeting? Where might they struggle with this same quality? And what pain or fear could be driving their attack? Take Lisa, a graphic designer, as an example. She was devastated when a client dismissed her work as unprofessional and amateur. Applying projection reversal, she asked herself, "They're attacking my professionalism. Where might they struggle with theirs?" She remembered the client admitting to feeling like an imposter in their own industry. That led to the next question. What fear drives this attack? The answer was clear. The client was terrified of being exposed as unprofessional. This insight transformed Lisa's perspective. Instead of taking the criticism personally, she recognized it as a projection of her client's own insecurity. She was able to address the concerns calmly and professionally while protecting her inner peace. Yet Jung also warned of a dangerous side effect. Once someone mastered projection reversal, relationships could become difficult. Seeing through everyone's defenses sometimes made it feel as though you were surrounded not by equal adults, but by wounded children. Heinrich described this sense of isolation to Jung. "Doctor, sometimes I feel like the only adult in a world of hurt children. I see their pain so clearly that I struggle to take their behavior seriously." Jung realized that this clarity came at a price, psychological immunity often created detachment from the emotional dramas that most people live in. The key, he believed, was to balance insight with compassion, to see others' pain without losing empathy for their struggles. Jung's final discovery about emotional impermeability was the most unsettling of all. His patients had not merely avoided being triggered. They had developed what he called emotional alchemy, the ability to transform every emotional challenge into psychological growth. Heinrich explained it this way: "Doctor, I no longer see difficult people as problems. I see them as teachers, bringing me the exact lessons I need for my growth. The more someone can trigger me, the more valuable they are to my development." This represented a complete reversal of ordinary psychology. Instead of avoiding painful triggers, Heinrich actively sought them out as opportunities. Instead of seeing difficult people as enemies, he viewed them as unconscious allies in his evolution. Jung recognized this as the ultimate stage of emotional impermeability, the ability to convert negativity into wisdom and conflict into fuel for development. Heinrich described the process with precision. When triggered, he didn't merely resist or observe. He asked himself 3 questions. What is this person teaching me about myself? What weakness are they exposing that I need to strengthen? What shadow aspect are they forcing me to confront? Jung noted that this made his patients nearly impossible to manipulate, control, or defeat emotionally. By turning every potential weakness into a strength, they became invulnerable, not through building armor, but by practicing transformation. This process of emotional alchemy unfolded in 3 stages. The first was trigger mining, extracting valuable lessons from anyone who disturbed their peace. The second was shadow integration, using others' behavior to uncover and heal hidden wounds within themselves. The third was strength synthesis, converting every exposed weakness into a developed strength. Consider Marcus, a sales manager. He was constantly irritated by what he perceived as laziness and excuses from his team. Instead of simply controlling his reaction, Marcus applied emotional alchemy. He asked, "What is their laziness teaching me?" The answer: that he expected others to share his drive without understanding their motivations. What weakness does this expose? His inability to inspire rather than demand. What strength can I develop? The ability to motivate through connection instead of pressure. Marcus leaned into this insight. He studied motivation psychology, learned to align with his team's personal goals, and grew into one of the company's most effective leaders. What once triggered his frustration became the catalyst for his greatest professional breakthrough. But Jung also cautioned about the dark side of emotional alchemy. Some who mastered it became so focused on their own growth that they lost empathy for those still struggling with basic emotional regulation. They risked becoming psychologically superior yet emotionally distant. Heinrich admitted this himself. "Doctor, sometimes I feel as though I'm conducting a psychology experiment rather than living a human life." Every interaction becomes an opportunity to study human nature rather than a barrier to connection. Jung discovered that the final challenge of emotional impermeability wasn't about shutting down feelings, but about maintaining humanity while achieving psychological transcendence. The real goal was never invulnerability, it was anti-fragility. True strength meant becoming wiser, stronger, and more compassionate with every challenge. As Jung himself said, the acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. Real immunity required embracing both strength and vulnerability. The ultimate stage of emotional alchemy, which Jung called compassionate immunity, was about using psychological resilience not to distance yourself from others, but to serve them. Heinrich eventually mastered this stage. At first, his immunity created distance. His calm presence unsettled people who mistook it for coldness. But through Jung's guidance, Heinrich realized that true emotional strength was incomplete if it only protected him. Real mastery meant creating space for others to feel safe, understood, and unjudged while he remained centered within himself. Over time, he transformed into what Jung described as a compassionate warrior, someone who could remain unshaken while still deeply caring for others. When his wife expressed frustration, Heinrich didn't detach. He held space for her emotions. When his employees came to him with stress, he listened fully without absorbing their burdens. He could witness chaos without becoming chaotic and offer support without becoming depleted. This was emotional Aikido in action, redirecting the energy of others' emotions into solutions, compassion, and wisdom. Henrik's transformation showed that emotional immunity is not about becoming detached, cold, or indifferent. It is about becoming so psychologically strong that you can remain warm, open, and connected, even in the middle of another person's storm. Jung's final insight revealed the ultimate paradox. The highest level of human psychology is complete vulnerability combined with complete invulnerability. The ability to feel deeply, yet never be controlled by what you feel. This journey, from shadow integration, through building inner boundaries to mastering projection reversal, transforming triggers with emotional alchemy, and finally becoming the compassionate warrior, represents the full path of psychological growth that Jung believed every human is capable of. His most disturbing discovery wasn't that some people never get angry, but that such resilience revealed the vast psychological potential lying dormant in us all. The question isn't whether you can achieve this level of emotional mastery. The question is, are you ready to claim it? Remember Henrik's final lesson. Doctor, I learned that true strength isn't about what can't touch you. It's about what you can touch without being changed by it. Your journey to emotional immunity starts now. Every trigger is a teacher. Every difficult person is a mirror. Every challenge is a doorway to growth. The only person who can truly disturb your peace is the part of yourself you haven't yet fully understood. Jung's disturbing discovery can become your liberating truth. You have the power to never be bothered by anyone again. If this message spoke to you, then don't stop here. Subscribe to Truth to Mastery and join us on this path of self-discovery, resilience, and psychological mastery. Every video is designed to help you unlock deeper strength, transform your struggles into wisdom, and walk through life untouchable, yet more compassionate than ever. Subscribe now to Truth to Mastery and step into the next dimension of your potential.